Far from every known star, far from every map the galaxy trusted, the Jur Alliance fleet drifted in a place that felt more like a grave than space. A silent black sea called Dead Space. A region no empire dared enter because there was nothing there. No planets, no moons, no light, no fuel, no radio signals, only endless darkness stretching in every direction like a cold cage, and the Jur fleet, once proud and strong with hundreds of ships, now floated helpless, powerless, terrified. There. Engines dead, their food systems collapsing, their emergency lights flickering like dying candles, and every alien aboard felt the same crushing truth. They were going to die here, alone, forgotten, lost where no rescue could ever reach them, and the fear inside every soldier, every officer, every captain grew heavier with every passing hour, until even the bravest began to shake, wondering how long they had left before starvation, before suffocation, before madness. And in the command ship, Grand Admiral Serac stood in the dark control room, his claws trembling as he stared at a lifeless screen, knowing their distress signals had gone nowhere, knowing that no empire would come to save them, because dead space swallowed all transmissions like a beast swallowing screams, and the emotional weight pressed down on his heart as he remembered the day they launched with pride, thinking themselves invincible, and now here they were, floating like dead metal, praying for a miracle that logic said would never come. And the fleet's doctor walked through the corridors, seeing soldiers curled in corners crying quietly, others staring into the void with empty eyes, some whispering goodbyes to families they would never see again, and she felt her throat tighten with heartbreak, because she could not save them. No medicine could save a dying fleet in a place where even hope felt dead, and days passed with no change, no light, no sound, only the constant hum of failing life support systems. And the temperature dropped so low ice formed inside helmets and along metallic walls, and hunger gnawed at stomachs like knives, and the emotional suffering became almost worse than death, because the waiting stretched endlessly, slow and cruel, and Admiral Serac finally stood before his officers and spoke in a weak voice, telling them they must accept the truth, that no one knew where they were, no one could track them, and no one would come, and some officers sobbed openly as he said it, their tears freezing against their skin, their chests aching with the pain of final acceptance, because dying in battle was honorable, dying defending their worlds was noble, but dying silently in empty darkness felt like a curse, a punishment, a cruel ending that stripped them of dignity, and the fleet prepared for the end, shutting down remaining systems to extend a few more hours of air, whispering quiet prayers, holding onto each other in the cold darkness, knowing every breath might be their last. And just when all hope had turned to dust, a small trembling voice from the radar station broke the silence, a young officer barely able to breathe as he whispered, "Movement." And at first no one reacted, they were too numb, too broken to believe anything could exist out there, but the officer repeated, louder this time, voice shaking, "Something is moving toward us." And the room snapped awake, officers spinning around, eyes wide with fear and disbelief, and Serac's heart pounded painfully, because movement in dead space should have been impossible. Nothing lived here, nothing traveled here, nothing survived here, and panic crashed through the fleet, some screaming that it was a predator, some whispering it was death itself, some begging for the end to be quick, and the radar officer kept shouting, saying the object was massive, larger than any Jur warship, and coming fast, too fast, and the air felt colder as terror surged through every heart. Because if something that big was moving freely in dead space, it meant they were prey, helpless prey about to be consumed, and the screens flickered with static before clearing just enough to show a faint silhouette in the distance. A giant dark shape gliding through the void with silent purpose. No lights, no signals, no response, only unstoppable motion, and every alien felt their soul tighten with pure fear, because this thing was heading straight for them, and their engines were dead, their weapons useless, their shields offline. They could do nothing but watch death approach, and some officers fell to their knees, sobbing, others grabbed each other's hands, shaking uncontrollably, and Admiral Serac closed his eyes, whispering a trembling farewell to his people, believing this was the final moment, believing the shadow in the dark was the end of everything. But then something strange happened. The shadow slowed, its movement shifting from attack to approach, as if it were stopping to observe them, and the shape grew clearer as faint emergency lights reflected off its hull, revealing sleek metal, enormous thrusters, and markings no one in the fleet recognized at first, until one officer whispered a word that froze every heart in the room: human. And the word echoed like thunder inside the silent ship, because humans were barely known in the galaxy, mysterious, quiet, isolated, a species that rarely traveled far from Earth and never interfered in galactic affairs. And the Jir had always heard rumors that humans were dangerous, unpredictable, secretive, and now a massive human ship stood before them in the darkest place in existence. And the emotional shock ripped through the fleet like lightning, because how did humans get here? How did they find them? How did any ship travel in dead space when every empire's technology failed? And fear twisted into confusion. Confusion twisted into trembling awe, because humans were not just here. They had found the Jir when no one else could. And the ship finally activated its lights, bright beams cutting through the void like dawn breaking in eternal night, illuminating thousands of frozen Jir faces staring out their windows with tears in their eyes, not knowing if this arrival meant rescue or death. And the human vessel remained silent, unmoving, watching, and that silence was almost unbearable, because it held power, mystery, purpose, and Admiral Serac felt his chest tighten painfully as he stared at the giant ship, whispering, "Why are they here?" Because nothing about this made sense, nothing about humanity's presence fit any logic, and yet here they were, and for the first time since entering dead space, the Jir fleet felt something they thought had died forever: hope, fragile and trembling like a small flame in darkness, but hope nonetheless, because if the humans found them, maybe they could save them, maybe they weren't alone, maybe death wasn't the only ending, and the emotional tension swelled until every breath felt heavy, every heartbeat felt loud, and every soul waited for the same thing. The humans' next move, their first message, their first sign of intent, because the arrival of that colossal ship changed everything, turned despair into suspense, and transformed a dying fleet into witnesses of a mystery far greater than death itself. And as the Jir stared into the glowing lights of the human ship, one truth echoed silently across every mind, a truth filled with fear and wonder. No one knew how humanity found them, no one knew what humanity wanted, and no one knew what would happen next. The moment the human ship appeared, the Jir fleet did not feel saved. They felt hunted, frozen in a terror so deep it wrapped around every heart like ice, because nothing about this situation made sense, nothing about humanity's presence felt normal. And the silence between the two fleets was louder than any alarm, louder than any scream, a crushing silence that made every alien imagine the same nightmare. Maybe humans came not as rescuers, but as executioners, and inside the command ship, Admiral Serac stared at the glowing human vessel with wide, shaking eyes, his breath shallow, his mind racing through every rumor he had ever heard about Earth, stories whispered in military halls, stories saying humans were unpredictable, emotional, capable of kindness but capable of destruction. A species no one truly understood, and the fear of the unknown hit harder than death itself, because dying in darkness had seemed certain, but dying at the hands of a mysterious species felt far more terrifying. And around him officers began to panic, voices cracking, some shouting to raise weapons even though they had none, others begging to send a message, others crying quietly, unable to speak, because their throats felt locked by dread, and a young navigator whispered through trembling lips, "Why would humans come here? How did they find us? What do they want?" And no one had an answer, and the emotional pain of not knowing, of helplessly waiting, tore through the fleet like a slow blade, because their lives were in someone else's hands, someone they didn't trust, someone they didn't understand, and the deeper the silence stretched, the more their fear grew, twisting into ugly imagination. Some believed humans had built technology to hunt stranded fleets, others believed this was a trap, that the Jir would be used, enslaved, dissected, and these horrific thoughts poisoned the air, turning the cold corridors into chambers of panic. And in the medical ship, a young soldier collapsed against a wall, tears streaming down his face as he whispered, "I don't want to die by their hands, I don't even know who they are." And the doctor knelt beside him, her own voice trembling as she said nothing, because she could not promise safety, could not promise hope, could not promise that the humans came in peace. And her silence made the soldier cry harder, his sobs echoing through the dim hall, adding to the emotional storm shaking the entire fleet. And all across the ships, families held each other, commanders gripped their chairs with shaking hands, technicians huddled near dead screens, everyone waiting for something. Anything. From the human ship, but nothing came, no greeting, no threat, no sound, only stillness, and that stillness felt like claws on their minds, scraping at their sanity, and Admiral Sirac's chest tightened painfully as he stared at the ship's hull, noticing how perfect it was, how clean, how advanced, how unlike any design in the galaxy, and he felt a deep, haunting realization. Humans might be far more advanced than anyone believed, far more capable, far more powerful, and that thought sank into him like a stone, filling him with dread and shame, because the Zhur, like many empires, had always ignored humans, dismissed them as primitive, weak, unimportant, and now they were face to face with a vessel that defied everything they thought they knew, and the emotional weight of that arrogance crushed Sirac's heart, making him whisper to himself, "We never understood them, we never even tried." And his voice cracked with guilt, because he saw his people shaking in fear, and he felt responsible for every lie they believed about Earth. And while he stood frozen, the radar officer gasped, pointing at the screen, his voice trembling as he said, "The human ship, it's scanning us." And every alien felt their blood run cold, because being scanned meant being analyzed, measured, judged, and the idea of humanity reading their systems, seeing their weakness, knowing they were helpless was unbearable, humiliating, terrifying, and a wave of panic swept through the fleet, some shouting to shut down systems, others screaming in fear, and Sirac slammed his claw against the console, not out of anger but out of helpless desperation, because he could do nothing to protect them, nothing, to stop whatever the humans planned, and the emotional pain of that helplessness burned through him like fire. And then, to their horror, the lights in the Zhur fleet flickered again, dimming as if the human ship's presence alone was affecting them, as if humanity's technology was beyond anything they could comprehend. And a whisper rose across the fleet, carried from ship to ship, a whisper filled with fear, hopelessness, and trembling truth. Humans own this moment. And those words shattered the last fragment of control the Zhur believed they had, because they finally understood something more frightening than death. They were no longer stranded alone. They were stranded under the gaze of a species whose intentions were unknown, whose power was unmatched, and whose silence felt like a giant hand closing slowly around their fate. And in that suffocating darkness, every heart in the Zhur fleet beat with one terrified question, a question that echoed in the soul of every soldier, every officer, every survivor. Did humanity come to save them, or to end them? Inside the command ship, time felt frozen, every second stretching like a lifetime, every heartbeat loud enough to hurt, and Admiral Sirac stood shaking, staring at the giant human vessel, unable to decide what was worse, the silence or the possibility that the silence meant doom. And across the fleet, thousands of Zhur officers sat frozen at their stations, afraid to move, afraid to speak, afraid that even a single sound might trigger something terrible from the humans, because no one knew what Earth wanted. No one knew why they were here. No one knew how they even found the fleet in a place where no signals could travel, and the fear of that mystery dug deep into every mind, turning their thoughts into nightmares. And then, without warning, every dead screen on every Zhur ship flickered to life, glowing with a soft pulse, and gasps filled the silence as terrified eyes stared at the sudden light. Because nothing in their ships should have been able to reactivate, nothing should have been able to power up on its own, and Admiral Sirac felt his breath catch in his throat, his claws gripping the console as a single line appeared across the screens. Written in calm, clean text, a message in a universal language understood by all species. "Stand by," and those two simple words hit the fleet with emotional force so strong it felt like a physical blow, because it meant humanity was not ignoring them. Humanity was not silent by accident, humanity was communicating, and the shock of that realization spread like a trembling wave through every ship, some officers crying out in fear, some whispering prayers, some collapsing into chairs with shaking legs, and Sirac stared at the words, his heart pounding painfully, because "stand by" did not sound like a threat, did not sound like destruction, it sounded like instruction, direction, something almost organized, and that tiny possibility ignited a dangerous spark inside him. A spark of hope, and the moment he felt it, he hated it, feared it, because hope had betrayed them once already, hope had died in dead space, and now this message felt like a trap, a cruel trick, but he could not deny the truth pulsing in his chest, the truth that maybe, just maybe, the humans had not come to kill them, and yet the fear did not fade. It twisted deeper, because if humans were trying to help, why? Why would they help a fleet from an alliance that never cared about Earth? Why would they help strangers they had no bond with? Why risk coming into dead space at all? And as Serac struggled with those questions, another screen blinked on, this time showing a faint image, static-covered but real. A live video feed from the human ship, a dark room with soft blue lights, and a figure sitting in a command chair, facing forward, calm, composed, unmistakably human, and the sight of a real human sent a chill through every Gere ship, because most had never seen one. Only heard rumors, stories that painted humans as unpredictable, emotional, dangerous. And yet the person on the screen did not look wild or violent. They looked steady, focused, strong. And then, with no dramatic build-up, no threat, the human spoke, their voice clear and steady, echoing through every ship in the Gere fleet. "We detected your distress signal," and those words cut through the silence like a blade of pure emotion, because no one in the Gere fleet believed their signal had reached anyone. No one believed anything could escape dead space, and tears filled the radar officer's eyes as he whispered, "They heard us." His voice breaking with disbelief, and a sob from somewhere in the room echoed softly, because for the first time in days, someone had acknowledged their suffering. Someone knew they were here, and the human continued speaking, their voice calm but strong. "We are here to assist." And those 4 words shattered the emotional dam inside the fleet, sending shock, confusion, disbelief, and overwhelming relief crashing into every heart, because they had expected death, judgment, maybe even conquest, but not assistance, not help, not rescue. And across the ship's aliens began to cry openly, hands pressed to their chests, shoulders shaking, because they had spent days preparing to die, and now someone was offering them life, and Admiral Serac felt his knees weaken, his vision blur with tears. He never imagined he would shed, because all his fear, all his guilt, all his anguish had been building toward a painful truth. No one else came, no ally, no empire, no friend, but the humans did, humans who had no reason to help, humans the galaxy barely respected, humans who owed the Gere nothing, and the emotional weight of that kindness cut deeper than any weapon, because it showed a strength that was not born from power, but from compassion, something the Gere had forgotten long ago. And the human ended the message with one final instruction: "Remain calm, help is coming." And then the screen went dark again, leaving the fleet in stunned silence, and Admiral Serac lowered his head, tears dripping onto the console, as the truth settled heavily into his soul. Humanity had not come as conquerors, not as predators, but as rescuers, and the realization shook him to his core, because they had believed humans were dangerous. Yet in their darkest moment, the only force in the galaxy that reached them was humanity. And the emotional shift was so powerful. It felt like breathing for the first time after drowning, and a single thought echoed through every trembling heart in the Gere fleet. A thought filled with awe, confusion, and overwhelming emotion. Maybe humans were not what the galaxy believed, maybe humans were something far greater. After the message ended, every ship in the Gere fleet fell into a silence so deep it felt holy, heavy, like the moment before breath returns to someone drowning. And Admiral Serac stood frozen, staring at the blank screen, hearing the human words echo over and over in his mind. "Help is coming." Words so simple, so calm, so impossible that they shook his heart more than any threat ever could. And across the fleet, aliens who had been preparing for death just hours ago now sat trembling, not with terror alone, but with something new and frightening, hope, fragile and confusing, because none of them knew what human help meant. None of them knew if humans were capable of helping. None of them even understood how humanity had reached dead space in the first place, and that mystery wrapped around their emotions like a tight rope, pulling them between fear and relief until they could barely breathe. And then, slowly, something incredible happened. The massive human ship moved, not with violence, not with urgency, but with steady purpose, gliding closer to the stranded Gere fleet, and every alien heart pounded painfully, expecting a weapon, expecting fire, expecting destruction, because that was all they had known in space. Power meant dominance, and dominance meant death. But instead, a soft light spread from the human vessel, a gentle blue glow drifting outward like calm waves across the dark, and the first Gere to see it let out a small, broken gasp, because the glow didn't feel like a weapon, it felt like warmth, like safety, like dawn in endless night, and the sensors confirmed something impossible. Life support levels on the Zhur ships were rising, oxygen stabilizing, temperatures increasing, systems waking, and officers cried out in disbelief as frozen pipes thawed, cracked wires healed, and failing lights brightened, and one technician collapsed to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably, whispering, "They're saving us?" Because nothing in their ships could repair themselves, nothing could restart life support without fuel, nothing could bring dying systems back. Not without power. And yet it was happening quietly, gently, without force, without pain. And Admiral Serac felt tears burn in his eyes as he understood what the blue light was. Some kind of human energy field, some technology far beyond anything the Zhur or any empire possessed, something capable of restoring life instead of ending it. And the emotional shock was overwhelming, because the Zhur had always believed strength was measured by how easily one could destroy, but humans were showing a different kind of strength. A strength that chose to heal instead of harm, and while the fleet watched in stunned silence, the human ship extended 3 giant structures from its hull, like metal wings unfolding, each one opening with smooth precision before releasing enormous drones. Silent, sleek machines glowing with soft white light, and the sight made every Zhur breath hitch because drones in war meant attack, meant invasion, meant death, but these drones did not aim weapons, did not lock targets, instead they broke into teams, flying toward individual Zhur ships, attaching themselves to broken engines, shattered fuel tanks, disabled cores, and in seconds those critical systems began to hum again. Tiny sparks of power turning into steady currents, dead engines slowly stirring back to life, and the emotional impact crashed through the fleet like a tidal wave, because for the first time since entering dead space, they heard a sound they thought they would never hear again. The soft, steady heartbeat of their ships returning, and some officers covered their mouths with shaking hands, unable to stop the tears, unable to process the miracle unfolding before them. And Serac felt his chest crack open with emotion as he whispered, "Why? Why would humans do this?" Because logic said no one should risk so much for a fleet that wasn't theirs. Logic said no empire would spend resources on strangers. But humanity wasn't following logic, humanity was following something deeper, something the Zhur had forgotten long ago. And while the repairs continued, another miracle struck. Giant pods launched from the human ship, drifting slowly toward the Zhur vessels, and when they attached to airlocks, they unlocked automatically, revealing crates of food, crates of water, sealed medical kits, thermal blankets, emergency generators. Everything the Zhur needed to live, everything they had been losing hope for. And when soldiers opened the crates and saw real food, real supplies, many collapsed in sobs, hugging each other, shaking with relief so powerful it hurt, because they had come so close to death, so close to giving up, and now humanity was feeding them, healing them, saving them without asking for anything in return. And in the command room, an officer whispered, voice trembling, "They didn't come to take, they came to give." And those words tore through Serac's heart like lightning, because it forced him to face a painful truth. The Zhur Alliance had never shown mercy to strangers, never helped those outside their borders, never cared about anyone they couldn't profit from, and yet here were humans, helping without gain, helping without recognition, helping without hesitation. And the emotional contrast was brutal, humiliating, humbling, and beautiful all at once. And as drones finished restoring engines one by one, the hum of power grew louder across the fleet, a sound like life itself returning, and every Zhur ship broadcast the same message. Their voices trembling, broken, filled with awe and gratitude they didn't know how to express. "Thank you." And even though the humans did not respond immediately, even though the massive ship remained calm and quiet, the Zhur felt something shift inside them, something deep, something life-changing, because they now understood the impossible. Humanity had not come because they owed a debt, not because they wanted control, not because they sought glory. They came because someone was stranded, someone was suffering, someone needed help, and humanity refused to look away. And in that moment, surrounded by drones, supplies, warmth, and newly beating engines, Admiral Serac felt his voice break as he whispered, "We were wrong about them." And those words echoed through his heart with painful clarity, because the galaxy had underestimated humanity, feared them, judged them, but only now did he see the truth. Humans were stronger than anyone knew, not because they could destroy, but because they chose to save. Even as the engines hummed back to life and warmth returned to the frozen corridors, A deep emotional storm continued inside the Zhur fleet, because rescue alone was shocking, rescue alone was unbelievable. But there was something even stranger happening, something no one could explain, something that made every heart tremble with a fear mixed with awe. How did humans know exactly what to fix, exactly what to send, exactly what systems were failing, and why did their drones move with such precision? Like they had done this 1,000 times before, and Admiral Serac couldn't stop staring at his screens, watching the human drones repair engines the Zhur engineers had declared impossible to save, watching power grids light up in perfect sequence, watching food crates arrive in silent waves like the humans had prepared them long before contact. And the more he watched, the heavier his chest felt, because none of this felt like a first-time rescue. None of this felt like an experiment. It felt practiced, familiar, routine, and a whisper started to rise in the ship, small at first, then spreading, shaking every mind it touched. What if humans had done this before? And a young intelligence officer, trembling with curiosity and fear, began digging through the data logs being restored by the human field. And suddenly her eyes widened, breath catching in her throat as she whispered, "There are records?" And Serac turned sharply, heart pounding, demanding to know what she had found. And she explained with a breaking voice that the human systems had unlocked fragments of ancient distress archives. Fragments the galaxy thought were lost, old reports from species long extinct or forgotten. And in those fragments, one truth appeared again and again. Mysterious rescues in dead zones, fleets saved by unknown ships, survivors reporting help from silent vessels that vanished before anyone could thank them. And as those fragments filled the screen, a chilling realization slammed into the command room, because the descriptions matched the human ship perfectly, the same hull design, the same silent approach, the same sudden repairs, the same supplies left behind without contact. And the emotional impact shattered the room into stunned disbelief, because this meant humanity had been rescuing fleets for centuries, maybe longer, rescuing strangers without credit, without recognition, without telling a single empire. And Serac felt tears sting his eyes as he whispered, voice shaking, "They've done this before many times." And the pain in that truth was overwhelming, because while the galaxy mocked humans, ignored Earth, denied them respect, humans had been saving lives in shadows, offering help without glory, kindness without reward, mercy without witnesses. And the emotional weight of that hit harder than any weapon, because it revealed a strength deeper than technology, deeper than power. It revealed character, heart, humanity, and the intelligence officer scrolled to one final fragment, older than all the others, a testimony from a dying captain of a forgotten species. His voice broken, weak, but filled with awe as he said, "They saved us when no one else would." And then, in a voice fading into death, he whispered, "They saved us because once, nobody saved them." And the room fell silent, every breath caught, every heart twisted, because those words carried a history the Zhur had never known. A history of human suffering, human abandonment, human trauma. And Serac felt a deep ache in his soul as he imagined humanity once crying for help, once calling into the void, once stranded and alone, and no one answering, no one coming, no one caring. And now, instead of becoming bitter, instead of becoming vengeful, humanity had taken that pain and turned it into purpose, promising silently that no one else would die the way they almost did. And the emotional power of that realization broke something inside the Zhur, shattered arrogance, shattered prejudice, shattered every lie they had believed about Earth. And Serac lowered his head, tears sliding freely as he whispered, "We never understood them, we never even looked." And across the fleet, officers wept quietly, overwhelmed by the truth that the weakest species in their eyes had become the strongest in the only way that truly mattered. And just when the fleet thought the emotional storm could not grow heavier, a final encrypted message arrived from the human ship, opening slowly on every screen, and it contained only a single line, simple but devastating. "You were not the first." And those 5 words echoed through every heart like a thunderclap, because they confirmed the impossible truth. Humanity had been saving the galaxy long before the galaxy ever cared to notice, long before anyone believed Earth mattered. And the Zhur understood now that the rescue they had called a miracle was just another promise humanity had been keeping in silence. And that revelation transformed their fear into something deeper, something humbling, something painfully emotional, respect, pure and profound, because for the first time in their history, the Zhir saw humanity not as a mystery, not as a threat, but as guardians forged. In suffering, protectors shaped by their own unhealed wounds, and Serac whispered through shaking lips, "We were wrong about who the strong ones truly are." And his words rang true across every trembling heart in the fleet. Even as the Zhir fleet slowly regained power and warmth, a different kind of shock spread through their systems. A shock not made of wires or engines but made of truth, because the rescued ships began transmitting automatic status beacons again, and those beacons, once dead and silent, now traveled beyond dead space, reaching listening posts, border stations, trade hubs, and political capitals across the galaxy, and with every transmission, a terrifying message spread farther and faster than light itself. The Zhir Alliance had been saved, and worse or better, depending on who heard it, saved by humans, and when that news reached the first nearby empire, confusion erupted, leaders arguing, soldiers shouting, citizens staring in disbelief, because no one understood how humans could even reach dead space, how humans could rescue an entire fleet, how humans, considered quiet, insignificant, isolated, had just done something no empire in history had ever achieved, and those questions rippled outward, multiplying, mutating, turning into fear as the truth continued spreading, each report adding more details, more impossible facts. The humans arrived alone, they restored engines, they fed the dying, they repaired what Zhir engineers called hopeless, and the emotional shock of that truth began to crush the galaxy's pride, because every great empire had once boasted that they were the strongest, the smartest, the most advanced. Yet none of them had ever done what humanity just did. And in the Dominion Empire, longtime rivals of the Zhir, council members stared at the incoming data with pale faces, hands trembling as they whispered, "Humans crossed dead space." And those 4 words held enough terror to silence the room, because dead space was a frontier no one dared to cross, a place where technology died, where fleets vanished, where no rescue was possible, yet humanity had entered it and left unharmed, and that realization sent waves of panic through military ranks, officers wondering if humans possessed technology beyond known physics, beyond galactic science, beyond every law they trusted, and the more they wondered, the more fear clung to their thoughts like a shadow, because if humans could find one stranded fleet, how many others had they found? How many silent missions had they completed? How many secrets did Earth hide behind its quiet face? And rumors began to form. Rumors that humanity had fleets hidden in dark space, fleets that watched over every route, every border, every empire, unseen but always present, and soon those rumors twisted into something sharper, something emotional and terrifying. If humans can save fleets, they can stop armies. And that idea hit the galaxy like a punch to the heart, because it meant humans were not only capable of rescue, they might be capable of ending wars before they even began, shutting down invasions, disabling weapons, freezing entire militaries with the same quiet power they used to save the Zhir. And in the Zhir homeworld, millions gathered around screens, watching live feeds of the rescued fleet returning home, ships once dead and drifting now flying steady and strong, and as families saw their loved ones stepping onto docks, weak, starving, exhausted, but alive. Cries of relief echoed across the planet, tears flowed freely, hands reached toward the sky in gratitude, and for the first time in generations, Zhir citizens spoke the name human, not with distrust or mockery, but with reverence, respect, and overwhelming emotion, because they knew their entire fleet, thousands of lives, would have died alone if humanity had not come, and in that moment, something deeper shifted inside the Zhir culture, something heavy and painful, the realization that their pride, their arrogance, their belief in superiority had blinded them to the truth that sometimes the greatest power comes from compassion, not dominance. And Admiral Serac, who once believed the Zhir Alliance stood above all others, now stood in the center of the returning dock, surrounded by cheering families, shaking officers, weeping survivors. Yet he felt no pride, only humility, only awe, only a quiet trembling inside his chest as he whispered to himself, "We owe our lives to humans." And the emotional weight of that sentence nearly brought him to his knees, because saying it out loud made it real, undeniable, eternal. And while the Zhir celebrated, other empires watched in silence, uneasy, anxious, terrified, because they saw something the Jir didn't. The rescue was not just an act of kindness, it was proof that humanity possessed reach, intelligence, and technology beyond anything the galaxy expected. And if humans could track distress signals in dead space, then humans could track anything, anywhere, at any time, and that realization turned cold fear into full panic in the hearts of rulers who had once laughed at Earth, rulers who had once dismissed humans as weak, rulers who had once considered conquering Earth themselves, and now those same rulers whispered in shaking voices, "If humans wanted to destroy us, we wouldn't even see it coming." And that terrifying truth spread through council halls, through military bunkers, through every hidden corner of the galaxy, until one emotion rose above all others. Respect, not forced by war, not demanded by threats, but earned through an act of pure, selfless rescue. And the galaxy trembled not because humans showed violence, but because humans showed mercy, and mercy from someone that powerful was the most frightening power of all, leaving every world with the same breathless, emotional question. What else are humans capable of? Even as the Jir homeworld celebrated and the galaxy trembled, the human ship did not leave immediately. It stayed in orbit like a silent guardian, unmoving, unreadable, and that stillness built a new kind of tension, a quiet suspense that made every heart beat faster, because if humanity had already saved them, if humanity had already done the impossible, then why were they still here? What more did they want? And Admiral Serac stood on the command deck with his hands shaking, staring at the massive human vessel hovering above the rescued fleet, feeling fear and gratitude twisting together inside him like two blades pressed against his chest, because he wanted to thank them, wanted to speak to them, wanted to understand them, but he also feared their answer, feared their intentions, feared the power they held so effortlessly. And across the fleet, officers whispered to one another, some saying the humans had come to demand payment, others saying they wanted territory, others saying they would reveal their true power and take control, and those whispers spread through the ships like cold wind, filling the survivors with dread, because every empire in the galaxy had learned the same lesson through blood. No one gives without wanting something in return, no rescue is free, no kindness is pure. But then, without warning, every screen on every Jir ship blinked to life again, glowing with the same soft white light as before, and breath caught in every throat. Every eye locked onto the screens, every soul going still as a single symbol appeared, the emblem of Earth, and then the image shifted to reveal the same human commander sitting in the same quiet room, calm, steady, eyes focused, voice silent for a long, unbearable moment, and the weight of that silence crushed the room, made Serac's heart ache, because he knew whatever the humans said next would shape everything. Their future, their alliance, maybe even the galaxy itself, and finally the humans spoke, their voice gentle but powerful, carrying no anger, no pride, just truth. "You are safe." And those three words broke something inside the Jir fleet, a dam of emotion that had been building since dead space, and some officers gasped softly, others covered their mouths as tears filled their eyes, because no one had said those words to them, no one had promised safety, no one had given them comfort, and now, after all the fear, all the suffering, humanity had given them something more valuable than fuel or food. They had given them relief, and the human continued, their voice steady. "We did not come for reward. We did not come for advantage. We came because life matters." And Serac felt his knees weaken, his breath trembling, because those words were unlike anything he had ever heard from a leader, unlike anything he had ever heard from an empire, because in the galaxy strength was measured by conquest, by control, by fear, yet humanity had acted from compassion, from empathy, from something deeper, something purer, and the emotional weight of that truth pressed down on Serac so heavily, he had to grip the console to stay standing. And across the fleet, survivors cried openly, hearts aching because they finally understood. Humans had saved them not because they were allies, not because they were useful, not because they were powerful, but because they were alive, and the human commander leaned forward slightly, their eyes filled with something deep, something old, something wounded, and they said, "Long ago, no one came for us," and those 6 words crashed through every mind like thunder, because the Jir now knew that humanity's strength was born from pain, from abandonment, from a history filled with silence and suffering, and Serac's chest tightened painfully as he imagined humanity stranded once, alone, calling for help in the dark, and no one answering, and now, instead of turning cold, instead of turning cruel, humanity had made a promise. That no one else would face that same fate, and the human voice softened, trembling just slightly, as if carrying the weight of centuries. We do not want fear. We do not want power. We want no one left behind. And those words were so raw, so emotional. They left every Ger breathless, because it revealed the truth behind the impossible rescue. Humans were not showing dominance. They were honoring a vow born from heartbreak, and finally, the human gave their last message. A message that felt like both comfort and command, both blessing and warning. When others fall, we lift, and as the words echoed across the ships, the human screen faded, the vessel powered down. Its lights, engines glowing softly as if preparing to leave, and Admiral Serac pressed his hand to his chest, tears falling freely as he whispered, barely able to speak. They saved us, because no one saved them. And that realization cut deeper than any blade, because it meant humanity had chosen to be the help they never received, chosen kindness over bitterness, chosen rescue over revenge, chosen hope over hate, and the emotional impact of that choice shook the fleet to its core, leaving every survivor with the same trembling truth. Humanity's greatest strength was not their technology. It was their heart. When the human message faded and the giant ship turned slowly away, a deep silence swept through the Ger fleet. Not a silence of fear this time, but a silence filled with breathless awe, heavy emotion, and overwhelming disbelief, because every alien aboard knew they had just witnessed something rare in the galaxy. Power without pride, strength without cruelty, rescue without demand, and as the human vessel prepared to leave, engines glowing softly like a blue sunrise in the dark, Admiral Serac felt his heart twist painfully. A strange ache he couldn't describe, because even though humanity had saved them, even though they owed their lives to Earth, he suddenly felt afraid again. Not afraid of death, but afraid of losing the only force in the universe that had shown them mercy, and he whispered to himself, voice trembling, "We will never forget them." His words shaking with gratitude and sorrow, because he knew they might never see humans again, might never understand them fully, might never repay what had been given. And as he stared at the massive ship drifting toward the edge of the void, he felt a tear slide down his cheek, the kind of tear that comes not from pain, but from the heavy weight of being saved when he believed he deserved nothing. And while the Ger ships powered up their drives, ready to return home, ready to leave dead space behind forever, the radar officer suddenly gasped, eyes widening, hands shaking violently as he pointed at the screen, his voice barely a whisper at first. "There's more?" And Serac snapped his head around, confusion and fear tangling inside him as he demanded to know what the officer meant, and the officer, trembling so hard he could barely speak, managed to choke out, "Multiple signatures. Dozens, no hundreds." And those words hit the room like a lightning strike, freezing every mind, every breath, every heartbeat, because dead space was supposed to be empty, silent, lifeless, yet the scanners were picking up massive energy readings all around them, signals that matched the human ship perfectly, same core, same frequency, same impossible technology, and the emotional shock slammed into the fleet like a tidal wave, leaving officers pale, shaking, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. And as the readings grew clearer, the terrifying truth appeared on the screens. Cluster after cluster of hidden vessels, scattered across the darkness like stars that had been sleeping, each signal strong, steady, unmistakably human, and the room shook with gasps, cries, broken voices, because the rescue ship was not alone. It had never been alone, and Serac felt the air leave his lungs as he whispered, barely able to speak. They had a fleet here, the whole time. And those words were so heavy, so unreal, they felt like they could collapse the room, because it meant humanity had not stumbled upon them by chance. Humanity had been watching dead space, guarding it, patrolling it, waiting for distress signals that no one else could hear, and the emotional weight of that truth was almost unbearable, because it meant humanity had built a network of lifelines in the darkest parts of the galaxy, had placed ships in the most dangerous regions, not to conquer, not to spy, but to save anyone who needed help, and that realization broke every last wall inside the Ger fleet, shattered every lie they had believed about strength, about kindness, about Earth, and Serac clutched the edge of the console, his voice shaking as he whispered, "They were never late to the galaxy. They were preparing to protect it." And across the fleet, officers cried openly, overcome by the sheer magnitude of what they had discovered, because humanity's silence was not weakness, humanity's distance was not fear, humanity's mystery was not danger. It was preparation, patience, purpose, and before anyone could speak another word, the human ship paused mid-flight, its engines dimming slightly, and a final message appeared on every screen, short, calm, unforgettable. "We are never far." And then, with a silent burst of light, the human ship vanished into hyperspace, leaving the Ger fleet trembling, breathless, forever changed, because they now carried a truth that would shake every empire to its core. A truth filled with fear, awe, and overwhelming emotion. Humanity was out there, watching, waiting, ready, not to rule the galaxy, but to save it whenever it falls, again and again and again.